What's going on, y'all? On today's video, we're talking about the pros and cons of Real Broker. I've been with Real Broker now for 10 months. My whole team has come over for 10 months now, and I think I have a pretty good grasp on that, but I want to talk how might the pros and cons affect different people in different positions in sort of different seasons of their career. The pros and cons of Real Broker. Let's hit it. How's it going, y'all? My name is Lynch, and I run 5 real estate teams around the country to the Twin Cities. Welcome to Denver, welcome to San Diego, welcome to Salt Lake City, and welcome to Tennessee. But this YouTube channel is all about helping real estate agents do their absolute best and do things in a different way, regardless of where you are along the journey. And frankly, videos like this, these are videos that I'm making as much for the internet as I am for my team and new agents who want to join my team. So the reality is, anytime I have a new agent, onboarding onto the team, there are questions about Real, and so I'm going to make a bunch of videos about Real, things that maybe people should know about Real, so then I can say, here, watch this playlist of videos about Real. Rather than having that same conversation multiple times, I can just put it down here on video form. I can help the people who are maybe joining my team, but I can also help the general public who's maybe considering things like joining Real. And if you're new to the channel, we're gonna keep having a ton of videos on this more broadly about real estate. You don't have to be with Real Broker to find some value on this page, I promise. My hope is to provide as much value to as many agents regardless of brokerage. So if you're new to the channel, do me a favor, subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if it's at all up your alley, what you're looking for, and go check out some of the other style videos, the more vlog style videos. I'm having a lot of fun on this channel. I'm very passionate about all of these things, so I'd love for you to kind of come along for the ride, and hopefully a rising tide lifts all ships. So let's dive into it, the pros and cons. I'm gonna break these up into sections rather than just going back and forth between pros and cons, because I think, I don't know, that's how my brain works a little bit more. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that it's cloud-based. There are inherent pros and cons for a cloud-based brokerage, so let's talk about it. Con number one, it's probably pretty obvious. There is no brick and mortar office for Real Brokerage pretty much anywhere in the country, as far as I know. I'm sure there's like a headquarters office, but the Minnesota brokerage doesn't have an office. It's all cloud-based. And when I originally started real estate, I joined a 100% brokerage commission, big time air quotes on that. Yeah, I'll talk more about that on this channel. And honestly, one of the biggest driving factors for why I chose that was that I really liked the office that they had. And then they moved. About a year into me being there, they moved offices, and I didn't like the next office nearly as much. It wasn't the vibe I was looking for. It wasn't a place that I wanted to spend a bunch of time. And so pretty much right after that happened, I actually got myself my own office in an art studio, actually, because I guess at the end of the day, I was like, I'm making videos, I'm taking photos, I think that qualifies. And so I found a pretty affordable studio space in Northeast Minneapolis, and I honestly found myself going to that place all the time. It was where I was shooting videos, and I thought it could be so productive in that shop space compared to going to the office, and particularly an office that I didn't even like that much. So then when I was switching over to Real, I felt like, I already have my own little office that I actually feel way more productive in. So the brick and mortar was not a factor for me at all. Now I have a much bigger office that can sort of fit my whole team, and it could fit a much larger team than what we have as well. In fairness, that is the goal, to grow this team and all other teams that I have, as well as start new ones around the country. And so no brick and mortar for the brokerage is a con. I would say that's easy to say that that's a negative. If you can join a team that has an office, well, problem solved. If you can afford your own office, well, problem solved. Also, might actually be better off. If you're a solo agent who could afford your own little office space, or maybe you have a home office, but if you could afford your own office space, I would say consider it, because it's really, really nice to have, and I think productivity can go through the roof. And one thing I want you to consider is that I think time at a brokerage, when you go to the office, there's a lot of people wasting your time. If you're trying to be a top producer and you go to a brokerage, there's just a lot of people who just are hanging out there not working. And that's not really the vibe that I want. I want an atmosphere of work ethic, of, hey, we're getting after it, we're all crushing it. And a lot of brokerage, I think you go in, and maybe there are people who are crushing it, but they have their own little office within the brokerage, and it seems like, the more common spaces, it's just kind of people trying to shoot the shit, and that is not what I want out of an office. And another angle of the con side of things is that if you're a brand new agent and you don't have an office to go into, that can be tricky. I think the biggest thing is if you're a new agent and you join Real, you're going to want to find some kind of mentor who will talk over things with you, because things like documents, things like DocuSign, things like the MLS, those things can be a little bit complicated to learn. So as a new agent at Real, you wouldn't have a brick and mortar unless you have a team to go to where you could ask, a managing broker a question about like contract law or something like that. But honestly, it's 2023 and communicating digitally is really easy. And like the reality is, even when I had a brick and mortar, I didn't go to my office to ask my broker a question. If I had a question, I needed an answer pretty quick. I wasn't just wandering into the office hoping I had an answer. I was shooting him a text, I was calling him, maybe emailed him a couple times, but mostly, hey, call him, here's a question I have. But the brokers at Real Broker, in my experience, have been really easy to get a hold of. Quick responses, texting, super easy. You can, if you have a bigger issue, call them, like a more complicated thing that would take forever to text, call them, and I've had really good luck with that. Or just, hey, give me a call when you have a sec. Those things, it's all very easy, and truthfully, it is not that different from having a brick and mortar where maybe your broker is in office. But the reality is most brokers at brick and mortar offices are in meetings a lot, right? They're busy people. And so it's really a similar experience in being able to contact your broker, whether it's cloud-based or not, in my experience. That's mostly the cons associated with a cloud-based broker. Okay, I think there are actually some really, really great pros associated with being cloud-based. For one, it also leads to the ability to have a much more national brokerage, right? A much more national community because it's all cloud-based. I was at a national broker that basically had a franchise, and while there was maybe, in the background, you could kind of sense some national support and certain people involved, the reality is it was still extremely siloed. So to the extent that I could learn, it was mostly from the internet and more public, information, or it was from the small silo of this, 100 or so people brokerage. And by the time I left that brokerage, I was the top producer at the brokerage out of the whole state, actually, within that national broker. I was the top producer. And then what I realized is I didn't really have anybody to look up to, right? And not that I didn't look up to my broker. I don't mean it like that. Look forward to, right? Like, hey, I'm trying to get to this point in my career. How do I do that? And who can I model some of these things off? The reality is my broker had a totally different business model than how I was doing things, so it wasn't like a perfect fit. With Real, the training and the national community of things is pretty crazy, and there is a ton of training to be had within Real, and it's so easy to get to. It feels very 2023. It feels like tapping into YouTube or something like that and trying to find very specific info that, isn't necessarily public information, but it's so easy to access within Real. And then last pro, this is so weird, but I bet it's something that new agents aren't thinking about, and I bet more seasoned agents, this will kind of hit home if you change brokerages. Because it's a cloud-based brokerage, because it's national, the like local community and the connection to the broker isn't gonna feel the same, right? It's not gonna feel as devastating to leave a broker. It's not gonna feel as personal. So if Real wasn't a good fit, right? For me, I'm pretty dang sure this is where I'm going to be for a very long time, given everything in the past year or so. I have no reason to believe otherwise. But if it is not the right fit, the reality is it will be much easier to leave than, a smaller boutique brokerage or something like that. All right, moving to the next section, I'm just thinking of this as the fact that Real is a fairly young company, right? Real has been around for like a decade, but really it's been, kind of what it is or closer to what it is for the past 5 or so years. So it's pretty dang new, pretty young for a company. And again, with a young company, and I don't mean young by age of the people who are in the brokerage, I just mean the brokerage itself is a relatively new company. And with being a new company, there are some negatives, some challenges that a new company will face. And I think a lot of that is going to come down to legacy. There are companies that have been around in real estate for such a long time. In Minnesota, Edina Realty is a huge company. They have like a pretty good grip on a lot of market share around the Twin Cities, but nationally, not so much, right? Edina is literally a suburb in Minnesota. But nationally, you have a little bit more legacy brands like Remax, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker, things that I think like those companies have been around for as long as I can remember, okay? But is legacy that important, right? Is the fact that a company has been around for a long time important to you as a real estate agent? My argument is no. Personally, and on this channel, the goal is to help people build their own personal brands. I think, yes, we are attached to a brokerage, and I love that Real lets me grow my brand on top of Real, and I think most brokerages kind of will allow that. But I think Real is a much nicer platform to build my brand on than a more legacy brand, because people have less opinions of Real than they do of Keller Williams. And I think more and more in the year 2023, 2024, and going forward, that company that it's attached to will apply less and less. And certainly to my target audience doesn't want to work with legacy brands. My target audience, it likes fresh and new and different, right? And hopefully everybody who watches this channel, that's what I want. I'm not talking to the masses, right? I'm not talking to vanilla on this channel. If you're vanilla and that's the lane you want to go down, cool, but this isn't the channel for you. And as you grow your own personal brand, I think you will see that people might ask what brokerage you're attached to, but I just say like, yeah, I'm with this brokerage. And I'll be like, honestly, brokerage has very little to do with how I run my business. I think of it like a website designer. If you asked a website designer who you loved their work, right? You thought, wow, you make the most beautiful websites I've ever seen. And you were like, what platform are you making this on? And they said Wix or Squarespace. Would you care, right? If you were like, well, the end product is awesome. Would you care what platform they're building it on? I would argue, no. I like how much the light is shifting in the back. Anyway, we're talking the platform, right? The reality is, if you had a video editor who edited on Adobe Premiere or Final Cut, if they made great videos, what do you care? What does it matter? I would argue it doesn't at all. So you as a personal brand, you put in good work, you create a really good result, and your brand shows that, people aren't gonna care what brokerage you're under. And different is better than better, and I believe that Real allows you to be different in a really compelling way that other brokerages don't as much. Even down to the logo of Real. I'm gonna throw this in, Random Pro. Real's logo, very simple, very clean, not distracting. There are so many brokerages, literally every brokerage logo, like main national brokerage that I can think of, I don't like the logo. So I have to have my logo next to another logo, and it drives me crazy that it would be next to one that I didn't really like. Real is simple and clean and understated, and it just fits nicely into signage, into online posts where you have to include stuff like that. So I love kind of the neutrality of that logo that will allow so many different brands to exist alongside of it. Another con associated with it being a new company is the fact that I think, probably the company still has some kinks that it's working out, right? Some little changes and kind of an ever-evolving change. But honestly, that's good. And the reality is the company puts a ton of effort and a ton of time into trying to roll out new products. Some of those will come and go, right? For sure. And some of them they'll launch and they'll tweak, right? Because they'll go, we could have done better on that launch. But that's a company that actually cares about your success, right? They are constantly announcing new features. It's honestly pretty impressive. And I am a fairly meat and potatoes user of a lot of this tech. There's the tech that I use that is really, really important to me. I mean, this camera, this is a pretty tech heavy camera. My studio, there's a lot of tech in here. But as it applies directly to real estate, the tech, I don't use that much of it. I'll talk a little bit about the tech in a second, but their sort of unrolling of new features and their willingness to test things, I think is really, really interesting and not something that I feel like I've seen or heard about in other brokerages. And then on the flip side of it being a new young company is the fact that you're getting in on the ground level. And now there are some stock benefits that come along with, why would it matter to be on the ground level? To some degree, there's something like 11,000 agents here now. It's not super, super ground level, but it is compared to so many other brokerages. It's still relatively fresh, relatively new, and I think that's a really compelling argument in the year 2024 to join Real. A lot of that ground level benefit has to do with stocks, right? But I also think a lot of it has to do with rev share. We'll talk about rev share as well in a second. And I'm not saying that this company is Apple, but if somebody said Apple's a young company and therefore I'm not going to invest in it, well, they missed out, right? Right? And you have to be at a brokerage, right? So you have to kind of set yourself up in one of the baskets of brokerages. And I think the argument for real, in terms of this sort of like downstream benefit of stocks and rev share and being somewhat new again in 2024, I think the argument for real is really, really hard to compete with. So let's talk stocks. I'll be honest, I think stocks are so boring. I think the stock market is boring. It is just not up my alley. I want to be working on a business and kind of in working on a business. I find that really compelling, and more passive investment isn't quite as exciting to me, although I understand the value. But just pardon me if my eyes glaze over in the future when I talk about stocks. At Real Broker, there's a stock option plan that you can partake in where you get a certain amount of commission, a percentage of that goes into stock, and when you spend that money on the stock or when you invest in the stock, they give you free stock or bonus stock or however you want to say it back for investing into the company. That alone, it's not like a 401k 1-for-1 match or anything like that. It's a little bit of sauce, a little bit extra that I think is fairly compelling. But I have complicated thoughts on that. Actually, I'll make a whole other video on that. And I have mixed feelings about if I'm going to do it again next year. But right now I am in that stock program, and I will say my stock portfolio, I have more money in stocks in real than I have ever had in stocks in my life because of all of these different things. One of my favorite pieces of the stock puzzle is the fact that Real will give you stocks for hitting certain milestones in production. So even without the stock purchase plan, then you can still like basically win or be awarded stocks for hitting certain milestones. And that actually, to me, is extremely powerful. For one, you get stocks when you hit your cap. We'll talk a little bit about cap. It's $12,000, but once you hit that $12,000 in, you get stocks. Then there's another very enticing stock incentive, which is known as Elite Agent. And that's basically between when you cap and you sell a certain amount of transactions and pay in a certain amount of transaction fees, then you get $16,000 in stocks. So depending on what the purchase price of the stock is at that time, you get that many stocks. And the beautiful thing about that is by that time, you basically have spent $18,000 or so, maybe it's $19,000. I have another video where I talk about this. It's like you have spent $19,000 to be at Real Broker, and you've gotten stocks for capping, and now you've gotten stocks for hitting Elite, almost to the tune of exactly what you've paid in. So you get the investment that you spent back by hitting Elite Agent. Now, hitting Elite Agent, it's a pretty good number of transactions. Not everybody's going to do it, but I think it's like such a good goal. I think even the number that they've arrived at, I'm like, that's a smart number because it's difficult to attain, but it's not like impossible. If it was twice as much, I think the incentive wouldn't be quite as appealing. But so that Elite Agent stock, that is so cool. And you can also get stocks for teaching within Real Academy. Again, I mentioned all the classes. There are a ton of classes. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you hit Elite, then you can be a teacher in Real Academy. And if you teach for a year, you get like another $8,000 in stock. So basically, I think you can end up with like $24,000 in bonus stocks for just doing a few things every year. I'm kind of a maniac. $24,000 is not enough for it to dramatically change my behavior, right? But if it's just for doing the things I'm doing anyway, I'm all about it. I have literally nothing to lose there. So yeah, something to consider. Again, I'll do a whole other video of probably maybe pros and cons of Real stock program, and we can dive really deep into that if you're interested. You also get stocks for attracting agents to Real, right? So if you're watching this video and you're considering Real and anything about what I'm doing is helping you decide on ending at Real, and you need a sponsor when you sign into Real, I'm more than happy to be that. I'm also more than happy to have a Zoom call or whatever. But in full transparency, you talk with me, you sign on to Real, then you are technically in my downline, right? And then I've attracted you as an agent, and I get a little bit of stock for every agent that I attract. I have not focused on that at all. Frankly, I've just been trying to get agents on my team, both in Minnesota and all of my other markets. That is more the goal for me than trying to attract people more generically to Real. But again, if the video like this was to help you, or if the videos that I put out on this channel about Real were to help you, I'd love to be a sponsor, right? That's cool, and there's something in it for me, so I'm not trying to pretend like there's not. Quick con about the stocks is that all of those stocks have a vesting period. It's a 1 to 3 year vesting period, depending on how you're getting the stocks, right? The stock program has a different vesting period than the awarded stocks to you. 1 to 3 years. And again, I've decided pretty firmly that I'll stay with Real. And so I'm not that concerned about that. It's just sort of off in the distance, there's this money that will be available to me. And, I'm very much about eyes on the prize, focus on the things that matter, focus on production and volume and running a good team and doing really good work. And all that stuff can just sort of be, cherry on top, extra bonus stuff. So speaking of staying with Real and also speaking of attracting agents, I want to talk a little bit about revenue share, rev share. Whatever you want to call it. Downline is like another term that I hear people say. Maybe that's not within Real, but it's a thing that I hear people say, which is basically when you attract an agent. I'll do a whole other video about revenue share. I'll probably do a couple of those because there's kind of the idea of, you hear people say pyramid scheme, right? Quite frankly, I think calling Real and even EXP a pyramid scheme is not really legitimate, and I think Real has a really smart way of making it feel that way, where basically you have to be in production. And there's no money to be made by attracting somebody to the company. It's not like when there's a sign-on fee, you get some of that sign-on fee. You only get any kind of revenue share once you attract somebody who actually closes any kind of transactions. And I think the very definition of a pyramid scheme is where you get money just for attracting people to be under you. Right? Just to give somebody the opportunity to sell the thing is where you get paid. And that's not the case in Real Broker. You only see any benefit for attracting somebody to the team when they actually sell real estate. And honestly, real estate is an incredible opportunity, and I think it's so infinitely better than anything that is a more traditional pyramid scheme, right? People can make life-changing money in real estate, and I think you can't really say that as well for any kind of pyramid scheme. And when it comes to revenue share, I think Real Broker is doing things right. For one, you have to be a producing agent for the first 3 years at least to get any kind of revenue share. So you can't just be a recruiter, right? In fact, they don't allow any recruiting. They don't want things to come across as recruitee, right? Which I appreciate, because I hate being recruited. I hate being sold to. It's like I just have visceral reaction to that kind of experience. And then again, like I said, you only see any kind of revenue share benefit from when that person you've attracted to Real does any kind of volume. I think that's about as clean of a way to do revenue share as possible. And so that whole stigma associated with revenue share, with the word pyramid scheme that people say, that all is so much of the con associated with the revenue share. Again, I think Real is doing it in the best way to defend against that vibe and that stigma as much as possible. I think there are other brokerages and other even just industries that do this in a way that doesn't feel quite as protected from that stigma. I'll be honest, there are brokerages that have rev share that I had been recruited to that I was not at all interested in, and so much of it had to do with that attitude, that approach, that recruitment feeling. There are some undeniable benefits of revenue share. Right now, I only have people who are in my team in my revenue share, tier 1, I guess is technically what it's called. And the reality is I've only tried to grow my team, right? And I even sort of brought some of my team over from our previous brokerage. And so then by default, they were under me in the tier 1. And I have seen really nice returns on their production, right? Something to the tune of like $10,000 so far over the course of 10 months. So again, in how you get free stocks, that's awesome. And you get revenue share. That's a bonus. That is money that I would not have made, would not have seen at a brokerage that didn't have these things. And the reality is, if I were to grow this even further, if these videos were to help people decide to move to Real and they made me their sponsor and I was tier 1 and then they attracted people, the potential Real is pretty unbelievable. Again, I'm not banking on that, and that's not a main priority for me, but if it happens, very cool. If I can continue to just act how I normally would, and that can help grow those other revenue streams, sweet. I literally have no argument with that at all. Two more things cool about revenue share. Again, I'll do a whole other video on this. Number one is that it's willable. If you were at Real and you had a great rev share situation where you had multiple tiers of revenue coming in, you could make, truly like whole year salaries just off revenue share. Probably, at a high level, you could make unbelievable salaries just off revenue share. But if you were to pass away and you have a family, you can't keep doing real estate, but that revenue share, that is willable. And so that can continue in perpetuity. And that part is really, really cool. Another piece that I really enjoy that Real recently switched is basically the fact that they now have what they're calling a retirement plan. There was a long time where at Real you had to be a producing agent to get any of the revenue share. And I kind of felt like, so what happens if I were to get old or just to switch industries entirely? Then the work that I put into the revenue share aspect of my business wouldn't be there. But now I think smartly, Real has unrolled the retirement plan where basically if you've been a producing agent for 3 years, then that revenue share can go on in perpetuity to you. Not even in the willable aspect of things, but it can go on in perpetuity to you. I think that's a really good way of doing it. And I still think it helps cut down on the recruitment feel of things that you see at some of these other brokerages. Okay, let's talk a little bit about fees, right? How much money does it cost to be at Real Broker? I said it before, I'm literally at a net positive for being at Real Broker compared to my other brokerage. I have a whole other video about this. Old brokerage, I spent $66,000 or so in a year. New brokerage, Real, I'm literally ahead. So any money that I've paid into Real to be a producing agent within Real Broker, I now have way more than that back in stocks and revenue share. The splits at Real Broker are quite good. Again, I said I paid $66,000 into a previous brokerage that was a 100% brokerage but had no cap. And so the splits at Real are really good, really, really competitive. And the cap, I think, is even more compelling and even more enticing. And I think one of the best in the industry, depending on how much volume you're doing. If you're doing very little volume, maybe 100% brokerage would technically make you more money just off commission splits. If you're doing any, impressive amount of volume, that starts to diminish and even kind of go in the other way. So the splits are 85-15 and the cap is $12,000. So what that means is out of all of your commissions, until you have paid in $12,000, 15% of your commissions will go to Real Broker. And depending on the median purchase price, depending on the commission that you're getting on a particular home, that number will change. It'll be a different amount of sales for every person, but you pay in $12,000 and then that 85-15 number has capped. That's really good. I know that like even EXP I think is 80-20 with a $16,000 cap, which has historically been pretty low compared to some of the more legacy brokerages and things like that. Once you paid in $12,000, then there's just a flat fee from cap to when you reach elite agent, and that's $225 per transaction. There's also a $30 BEOP, like errors and omission, basically protection, that you pay indefinitely for every single transaction. $30, basically nothing, and only when you have a transaction. And once you've paid that $225 transaction fee enough times to where you've paid in $6,000, which by the way is like 26 transactions. I think I said $225 for that transaction fee earlier. It's actually $285. But that is a good thing. That was something that I was happy to hear, because what that means is fewer transactions after you cap leads to elite agent. And elite agent has all of the other benefits like the stock bonus and teaching bonuses as well. So being able to arrive at elite agent a little bit sooner, I think it's 5 or 6 transactions earlier with $285. That's actually pretty cool. And then once you've hit elite agent, that $285 I think goes down to $125, which is so cheap per transaction. That's crazy. And by the way, Real doesn't charge by default any kind of BAC, any kind of broker admin commission or anything like that, or additional brokerage income or whatever legally you have to call it. So now we as a team can charge an additional fee, and it will pay for our transaction coordinator. So even at my old brokerage, they were also charging that number, and then I was paying for a transaction coordinator on top of things to the tune of, 30 grand or something like that, depending on how many transactions. And I feel like I did this a little bit backwards, talking about caps, talking about a lead agent, because your sign-on fee is actually pretty dang reasonable. So let's talk about your brand new agent, or you're coming over to Real. What does that look like? Because there's a $250 sign-on fee, right? Just to be part of the brokerage. I don't know. My other brokerage had it too, so I don't know. I never really cared. It's basically just, hey, this is the cost that it's going to take to get onboarded into Real, $250, and then out of the first 3 transactions you do, so it's no extra money until you've made some money. Out of the first 3 transactions you do, you're paying in $250 per transaction for those first 3, for a total of $750. So again, you basically have $12,000 cap, another $6,000 in transaction fees if you reach elite agent. So that's $18,000, and then another $1,000 in your first year between the startup fee and the $750 worth of early on transaction fees. So $19,000 a year if you reach elite agent, which again, by the way, they give you pretty much that much money in stock for reaching elite agent. Now, lastly, I want to talk about tech. One thing that I appreciate about Real is that they didn't do this sort of like second world thing that EXP did. I'll be honest, that world is something that I just find so odd and almost dystopian. I like to have to go into a video game like thing to talk to your broker, I guess, or to go to a class. Just give me a link. That's how I feel. And maybe they're doing that. Maybe they've switched some of that over, but that seems pretty absurd to me. And so I like the fact that Real Broker is like, hey, here's a website with a bunch of different things that you can click on and you can get to where you want to go. Again, I just feel like you just don't have to enter some video game to get to those things. Real Broker does have some tech though that I really, really enjoy. The big one is the Rezen app. It used to be called the Real app. Now it's REZEN. And it's basically the hub for everything that you're doing in Real. It has all of your transactions. You can track things like the equity, which is basically stocks. You can track things like your revenue share. The stock program is through Solium or ShareWorks, which is really easy, have a really easy app to use. So you can like log in that way and take a look at your stocks. Again, you can see your revenue share. You can see what transactions you have coming down the pike, what transactions you've closed in the past, all that. The Rezen app, pretty sweet, pretty easy to use. It's also the same thing as like a SkySlope. A transaction coordinator is all baked into that Rezen app, and it's super easy. My transaction coordinators hadn't been with Real yet, and their onboarding was relatively easy, and it seems like they've taken to it very quickly. Real also gives you access to Workplace, which is basically like Facebook, but for a business. So just the community of Real, and you can sort of talk across the whole company, which I think is nice. I don't use it that much. I tend to be a little bit more of a lurker, but I think for certain people, that would be a really, really good fit for their personality. There's also like referral groups and things like that where you can say, hey, I have a client who's trying to move to Sarasota, Florida, looking for an agent. This is their budget, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody can say, hey, yep, I could do that. And it's really, really easy to find referrals that way. There's also an AI assistant in the Rezen app that it's called Leo. And right now, I don't use it that much. I think it will lead to a very fluid use of the Rezen app, and I can see where it's headed, and I love that Real is doing that. Right now, it's like, to me, it's like, okay. It's like you can ask the questions and be like, oh, cool, I didn't have to ask my broker that or ask, email support or something. It can give you pretty simple answers and some slightly more complicated answers, but I think there's some room to grow for that. Then lastly with the tech is Chime. Chime is the CRM that Real provides to any of its agents for a fee. It's $40 a month if you want to sign on to that, but I love that it's optional because I am kind of a spreadsheet guy, actually. I don't use Chime, although I might start using it because it seems like it's really powerful. If you were to just buy Chime as like an agent on some other brokers that didn't provide it, I think it's like $300 to $500 or something like that per month. So $40 a month, pretty easy peasy. And again, the optional nature of it is really nice. My old brokerage had a CRM I thought it was horrendous. I thought it was unusable, which is why I started to use spreadsheets all the time. And now I think, okay, now that there's like a smarter one here, maybe I can sort of begin to migrate things over to that. But that's what I got for this video. That's the pros and cons as I see them. I hope it was helpful. I hope you can see that I'm trying to be very honest about how I see these things. Again, Real Broker is sweet. I would love to talk with you about it. You can email me at jesse@tothetwincities.com. And yeah, just get a hold of me. I'd love to chat about it. And you know, if you want to join my team or my team anywhere around the country, or start a new version of my team somewhere where you are, I would be really, really interested in talking to you. So reach out, jesse@tothetwincities.com, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. Bye-bye.